can now speak to the Chair of the Office of Budget Responsibility, Richard Hughes. Thank you for being with us. I know you'd obviously be expecting on days like this to be talking about the measures in the budget, but we do have to start, of course, with that extraordinary accidental release of effectively the entire budget. Can you just talk me through what happened when you first found out about it? Who told you?
So we discovered that our forecast had been accidentally uploaded onto our website. It was a technical error and an error. As soon as we found out about it, we took action to take it down. We've apologised to the Chancellor, to members of Parliament. We've initiated an investigation that will report to our Oversight Board, to the Treasury and to the Treasury Committee of Parliament, and I'll be acting on those recommendations.
How did you feel when you found out that it had been released by mistake?
Obviously mortified. We pride ourselves on our professionalism at the OBR. We don't like these things to happen. We take budget security very seriously, and we've initiated an investigation to find out what's happened, and we'll act on its recommendations as soon as they're available.
Can I talk about it being taken down? Because you say that as soon as you found out, you took it down. I mean, we were here in the studio when the first snap came through from Reuters, I think it was, giving a statement about what the OBR had found. And then, Ed Conway noticed that the market had suddenly gone completely crazy, obviously reacting to the leak. And I guess I'm just wondering, it felt like it took quite a long time for you to realise what had happened. Is that fair?
We took action as soon as we found out about it. As soon as we were able to, we took it down. There was a high volume of traffic onto our website, and so we took it down as soon as we could.
Can you talk me through a little bit more about how did you find out? Who told you, and what happened when you found out?
Sophie, we've initiated an investigation. I think it's important that investigation runs its course. It will report to the Treasury and the Treasury Committee and be overseen by our Oversight Board. We'll publish the report, and you'll have all the answers to your questions about what happened in the result of that report, and we'll act on them immediately.
Who's running the investigation?
It'll be overseen by our Oversight Board. It will report to the Treasury Committee. We'll need to appoint people to do it, and we'll announce more details in due course.
What's the Oversight Board?
The governance board of our Office of Budget Responsibility.
So you don't know who's going to run it yet?
It's the Oversight Board of the OBR.
Find out. Okay. Have you considered?
The Oversight Board of the Treasury is. The Oversight Board of the OBR is Baroness Sarah Hogg and Dame Susan Rice.
Have you considered your position?
There is an investigation that we will do. It will report to the Treasury and the Treasury Committee, and I always serve at the pleasure of the Treasury and the Treasury Committee.
So is that it feels like you're just kind of waiting for other people to tell you what you should think on that?
So we need to look into what happened. We need to get to the bottom of what happened. There'll be an investigation. There'll be a set of recommendations. It will report to the Treasury and the Treasury Committee, and based on the recommendations of that report and the conclusions of the Treasury and the Treasury Committee, I serve at the confidence of them, and I will act on whatever they tell me.
Obviously, watching Rachel Reeves deliver the budget, it felt very different from normal. It felt like, I guess, all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. And certainly at the beginning, it put her in a pretty difficult position. She was unable to frame the argument because everyone had seen the budget before she'd had a chance to actually deliver it. Do you feel, I guess, a bit guilty because of what happened?
We've apologised for what's happened. We apologise to the Chancellor and members of Parliament. We do want to get to the bottom of this and make sure it doesn't happen again. And we'll update the public on the investigation as soon as we can. OK. Can I just ask you quickly about the budget itself? What is your kind of key takeaways? Because it feels like, there's the extra headroom, of course, but it does feel like quite a lot of the actual forecasts, if it comes to living standards in particular, are pretty gloomy still. So we've downgraded our forecast of productivity growth by about 0.3 percentage points. So we've got the economy growing at 1.5% over the next 5 years. That's slower growth than was in our previous forecast, so that itself puts a squeeze on living standards, and also the fact that taxes are going up through the form of freezes on thresholds and other increases in personal taxes also means that growth in living standards slows over the forecast period from where they are now to around 0.25% over the middle of the forecast. That's significantly lower than the 1% growth we've seen in living standards in the recent past, yes.
Hello, Richard Hughes. It's Sam Coates. I've just got one question. It's sort of ironic that you're in trouble with the Chancellor today, because looking through the judgments that you've made, they're enormously in favour of this Treasury. You've made some whopping great assumptions that the Treasury would be delighted about. You seem to have done a U-turn on whether or not you're going to sort of score cost the employment rights bill. You promised you'd do that at the last fiscal event. You haven't done that today. You seem to have taken an assumption that the welfare bill is just going to fall of its own accord to the tune of maybe £10 billion. Did the Treasury get to you a bit and lean on you to make sure that, you know, the numbers are a bit more flattering than they otherwise might have been?
No, our forecasts are always based on the independent judgment of the members of the Budget Responsibility Committee. We've downgraded productivity growth in this forecast, but despite that, because there are a lot of moving parts in a forecast, you know, while productivity growth was lower, you've also got higher inflation in the near term, as well as higher growth in earnings in the near term. And those two factors actually offset in tax receipts the downgraded productivity, which is why you see higher tax receipts in our forecast compared to March, despite lower real growth over the rest of the forecast. On the other questions you asked, what are the reasons why we haven't taken account of the employment rights bill in this forecast? Is that at the moment we don't have the details of that bill. In particular, some of the key details, like the probation period for new recruits, is still going to be specified in secondary legislation. So it's something which we'll have to look at once we've got the details that we need to understand its impact on things like the labour supply and employment decisions.
Can I just ask you a bit more of a kind of big picture question to finish, if I may, about the UK economy? Because look, you know, we're all kind of feeling the impact of what's been, you know, a difficult time when it comes to, you know, the cost of living, when it comes to economic growth, all that kind of thing. How resilient do you think the UK is at the minute economically?
I think a big challenge the UK has is that it's got slow growth and it's got relatively high interest rates compared to its international peers. And what that does is put a big squeeze on households if they've got mortgages, and it also puts a big squeeze on the government finances because its revenues aren't growing as slowly as they used to in the past, and also the cost of the very large burden of debt that it's built up over time in the wake of the financial crisis, in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of the energy crisis, is now getting much more expensive. The country is now paying £100 billion per year servicing its debt, and its debt servicing costs as a share of GDP are up at levels which we haven't really seen at any point in the post-war period.
Richard, hi, it's Ed Conway here. Are we now a high-tax nation? Where do we stand? I mean, one of the things this has done is to raise taxation quite a lot, hasn't it? And so can you give us a sense of both where we stand, but also where we've come just in the last few sets of fiscal policies?
Yeah, so the tax burden since the pandemic is on track to rise by 5 percentage points as a share of GDP and reach a historic high of 38% of GDP by the time we get to the end of our forecast. You know, that moves us further away from the American tradition of having sort of low tax and small governments, sort of closer to being a sort of continental-style European country. We've still got a lower tax burden, however, compared to countries like France, but the tax burden has been rising significantly in the recent past. It's going to rise further, in particular pushed up in our forecast by higher personal taxes to reach an all-time high by the end. You know, that partly reflects what I was talking about earlier, which is that the government's got a much bigger stock of debt to service, and so 2% of GDP of that extra cost of running the government is actually just coming from servicing its debts rather than delivering better public services, rather than delivering better welfare benefits. So one of the reasons why that tax burden is being pushed up in the UK, but also around the world, is that governments have come into this decade with much higher debts than in previous years, and servicing that debt is pushing up on the tax burden while not also giving them the resources that they want to spend on better public services or deliver tax cuts elsewhere.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to speak to you today. Thank you.